Last week we began getting into the meat of this chapter. Yeah, and I think I'm trying to figure where we left off.
That's 9, huh?
Yeah, that's right.
You're welcome.
This is 9, huh?
Yeah.
And we started working on the question: is God responsible for the suffering that results from natural causes? Have our views as Christians changed from earlier Christians? I'm trying to think where we left off. Actually, I think we left off on unanswered questions.
Yeah, I think we're at the top of page 37.
Yeah. I want to say we did read human responsibility and negligence.
I think we were ready for the powers of darkness.
You think that we read the second piece?
Yes, I think we were ready for the powers of darkness.
Okay.
Because I remember discussing the unanswered questions.
Okay, unanswered questions. Okay.
What were the unanswered questions?
You got a better memory than we do.
You have a better memory than I do, and I'm leading the class.
She's younger than us,
A
Yeah.
lot younger, yes.
except for Andy. Were we talking about how people say natural disasters
right.
happen because we're being punished?
Well, yeah, that's part of it. But the second, the unanswered questions, remember this paragraph and the answer, we don't know why. What we do know about human finitude, the laws of nature, human responsibility, and the consequences of irresponsibility can sometimes give us partial answers, but in the last analysis, we just don't know. Should not pretend that we do and do not have or feel guilty because we don't. So, like when people suffer and that question arises, which it many times does, and that question is why, our response is, or it should be, I don't know. And I'm sorry, and what can I do? And and that's where we're supposed to be. People don't need to hear, God needed another angel. It's the will of God. No one wants to hear it's the will of God. Trust me, no one wants to hear that. That people are going to be angry. People are going to be upset. People are going to be mourning. They need that space, and people sometimes are angry at God, and that is a normal response. There's no reason to add guilt to that. The anger typically subsides. But if you add things like guilt on top of that, it's the will of God. What do you mean it's the will of God? Remember when we watched Joan of Arcadia in the 6 o'clock class? Remember, and Mary Steenburgen is walking outside, and there is a priest outside, ringing a bell, taking donations, and she asks him about suffering. And he begins to give her these textbook type answers. Now, he wasn't ready for her. I mean, she was like a force to be reckoned with when she walked out of that building. And boy, she laid it into him. But that was an example of what, not to say. Now, granted, he was kind of sideswiped, but
Caught off guard.
he was caught off guard. But that's an example of this, right? People are not looking to be lectured. They're not looking for, when they ask why, it's because they're suffering. And your job, whether it be a minister, well, actually, we're all ministers. Yeah, so whether it to be a teaching minister or a minister in the church, a member, doesn't make a difference. We're all called to minister, right? So saying less is always better, but it doesn't mean that your presence must be there. And people will appreciate that, and people will remember that. They will remember that. They're not looking for the big this big philosophical answer in the sky that no one knows. Right?
So
All right.
that feeling is so pervasive. There's a TV show called Forensic Files, and there was this case where a building manager forged the documents of every tenant in his building, that he told them that the paint in the building was lead-based.
Hmm.
And they signed the document so they could prevent their children from doing, but he forged it, and none of the tenants knew.
Oh.
And a girl, she was 3 or 4 years old, died from
Eating paint chips.
lead poisoning, and it took them forever to figure it out because nobody knew what. And she'd been eating the paint chips off the porch on her apartment, and she died. And they interviewed the mother, and the mother said, "Well, I had to come to the realization that God gave me my baby, and God needed her back." I thought that just fits in with what we've been.
Yeah.
I mean, she profoundly believed that. I don't believe God punished her, or that God takes
Yeah.
children away.
There's
or-
human negligence in
she
that.
She wasn't saying she was being punished, but she was
Yeah.
saying that God gave her
Yeah.
and God took her away.
And for some people, when you these things are coping mechanisms, I guess, or some they could be legitimate theologies. I can't tell you how many times I drive to work on Sunday morning, and I listen to sermons, because a lot of times they'll do church services, and some of them are really good, and some of them, I sit there and I go, ooh, that's just. Well, I mean, I'm just like, it's definitely not my theology, but we all have different theologies, so what might make me cringe might make someone smile, and what might make me smile might make someone else cringe. We always have to remember that. But yes, and these type of ideas they're prominent. They're all over the place. Like I said, I heard a priest say something like this once. That God needed another angel. And so it's just, again, sometimes little less is better. When we think about being in elementary school, every time my teachers would say, just give me the answer. Just give me the answer. The more you put down on this paper is the more opportunity for you to get the answer wrong. Just say what you have to say and be done with it. And less is better. Less is better, especially in these type of situations. A presence of ministry, a ministry of presence, is not so well understood, and yet it's very effective. And that's just being there. Just being there
They
is.
have that as part of their statement of purpose on the wall in the chaplain's office at the hospital.
At the hospital.
Ministry of
Yeah,
Presence.
ministry of presence. Just be there. Just
Yep.
be there for someone. That is, and people will remember that
Yep.
after the fact.
Oh, yeah.
They will remember you being there. You don't, they're not looking for a lecture. They're not looking for some grand answer. They just need someone. They need someone, and that's what a ministry of presence is. When I did campus ministry, I remember my supervising pastor when we were sitting there talking about my hours and what I was to do, and this was at the University of Alabama, and she said, "You don't have to be in the office till 11 o'clock." And I looked at her and said, 11 o'clock? I said, "Isn't that kind of late?" She said, No, you'll see. And I'm thinking that nothing is free. And I'm thinking that you'll see seemed like a loaded statement. And she was right, because her big thing was a ministry of presence. And so you're with the students all the time. I had students banging on my door 2, 3, 4 in the morning, to talk, to hang out, because how students are.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when I was that age, I never slept. I was always out, and so were they. And so every Monday through Thursday, I came into the office crawling at 11 o'clock because I was exhausted.
Yeah.
Because I was exhausted. And then I understood what she said was 11 o'clock. I get it. It should have been 2 o'clock in the afternoon. But the power of that is immeasurable. It really does a world of difference. And I think that's what people need during times of tragedy. All right, so Roman numeral 4, the power of darkness. And we're going to start from Guthrie, page, actually it starts on page 173, so that's my own typo. All right, terrible as it can be, the worst form of evil is manifested not in natural misfortune that happens to us in what we human beings do to each other. It appears not in pain, suffering, and death as such, but in the pain, suffering, and death we inflict on each other. The evil we do to each other has three dimensions. It is always rebellion against God and the order of God's good creation. It is always indifference or enmity toward our fellow human beings. And it is always the self-destructive contradiction of what we ourselves were created to be. The worst form of evil, in other words, is moral evil that expresses itself as sin. But evil is much more than sin. When we sin, we come under the spell of a power greater than ourselves and our ability to resist, a power from which we cannot free ourselves no matter how hard we try. We do evil, but when we do, we are trapped and controlled by evil. It dwells in us, yet somehow has an existence of its own outside us. I may decide that I will entrust my life into God's care and not be anxious about the future. I may decide to be more understanding, more open, more patient, as I live with other members of my family, with friends, and with business associates. I may decide that my position on economic, political, and social issues will be determined by consideration of the common good of all people, not of my own self-interest, or that my particular sex, race, class, or nation. But I find over and over again that I cannot do what I decide to do, what I do not want to do. I cannot blame anyone else for my sin, not even the devil, because I do it. Yet I cannot help doing it. Something gets into me and takes over my feelings and actions that make me the kind of person I do not want to be and makes me do the kind of things I do not want to do. That something is the dark power of evil in my life. How does Paul talk about this in Romans? Even when we do set out to combat the power of evil, we find that we are mastered by it. Parents fight the temptation to think of their own comfort and security and sacrifice for the good of their child, only to find that it is not really the children's good, but their own ambition or concern about what other people will think that actually determines their parenting. A nation fights tyranny in another nation in order to free its citizens from injustice and suffering, and finds that to do so it must cause horrible pain, suffering, and death. A community establishes a program of urban renewal so that poor people may have decent homes, but in tearing down slums deprives some poor people of any home at all. We fight evil and discover that we are its instruments. When we ask about evil, we ask about this mysterious enslaving power that takes possession even of decent people and perverts even the good that they want to do. We ask why even well-meaning people sin. We cannot avoid sin even when we try. Why even our efforts to destroy evil perpetuate rebellion against God, enmity against neighbor, and self-destruction. Where does this evil come from that gets into us? What is the nature of this dark power that has invaded God's good creation? We will look at several answers that have been given to this universal problem and evaluate them from a biblical point of view. All right, so in this large section, Guthrie begins to talk about the power of darkness, talking about evil being greater than sin itself. And this goes along with the Reformed concept of being in a broken, it's a condition, right, that affects all of nature, right? It's not so much original sin that's passed down through DNA, but it's a condition that affects the entirety of creation, right? And so Guthrie begins to talk about it. Even when people go to do things, good things, what does Guthrie say?
They still end up doing bad
Yeah,
things.
yeah. And it's not that they're, that they're but it's small things even,
Yeah.
right? You want to do the best for your kid, but in the end it turns out you're still more concerned about what people are thinking than parenting, right?
Somewhere in there in the scripture, Paul says, I do the things I don't want to do.
Yes. Yes, yes. So when we think about that, so according to Guthrie, there's a power. There's a power. So we're going to break this down, or Guthrie actually breaks this down into, I think it's three. I think it's actually, there we go. There's a few things he breaks, actually a bunch of things, he breaks it down when he discusses it. All right, so even with the best of intentions, sin creeps in, and evil is there. You can look at it and say it's individual, or it's systemic, right? Theologians have said that, you have some theologians, it was a Latin American liberation theology that looked at some of the evils that go on in South America, South and Central America. And some theologians came to the conclusion that it's not just individuals, but it's the systems that we create that perpetuate this, right? That oppress people. So, and a system is a lot bigger than one individual, right? It's bigger, right? It takes on almost a mind of its own, almost like a Frankenstein type of, like a monster almost. And I'm not saying all systems are bad. That's not what I'm saying.
Yeah.
But sometimes we can create these systems, and because systems are created by people, right? They're faulty
Yeah.
to an extent, right?
People that grow up in these systems, they
Right.
see it as the norm.
Exactly. People see it as a norm. And so it's not just each of us doing it to each other. It's the systems that we create that perpetuate or push down or do harm. So it's an interesting thing, looking at theology. It's not just this neat and tidy thing that you put in a little box and you can, put on your shelf when you're done studying it, right? You can apply it to other things, right? To look at how does this system affect people, right? So the power of darkness. So the first point that Guthrie brings out in A is what?
An evil God.
An evil God, right? With a question mark next to it. One of the most ancient explanations of the existence and power of evil is to say that besides the good God, there is an evil God, an eternal principle of evil that opposes an eternal principle of good. We have already encountered and rejected this dualism in our study within the doctrine of creation. And so this concept of dualism, I think in some of the ancient religions, Zoroastrianism, you get this concept of a good being and a bad being. We even see it in our cartoons that we all grew up with, right? Every time Tom is chasing Jerry and he has Jerry pinned in a corner, and Tom's thinking what to do, and a little angel pops on one. Oh, Thomas, don't do that. Let that little mouse go. That's just not right. And then the little demon pops up on the other shoulder. Stick it to him. And it's
Yeah.
and of course Tom the cat is caught in between this debate. And so an evil God, to say that there is a spiritual being that is evil or equal to God in a bad way. And in the Bible, we have the personification of evil, for many, within the person of who?
Satan.
Satan, right. The term Satan or Satan literally means the accuser, right? And, that little guy's been in there since the very beginning, right? So, but there are people who will go way over to think that the devil has this incredible amount of power hiding behind every rock, every tree, every stump, looking to get you. And, of course, that does nothing but creates a life filled with fear, and, you just don't live, right? Because you're afraid of doing anything. And so, again, remember in Guthrie, in the larger paragraph that I read, when it comes to sin, who is doing the sin?
You are.
You are.
Yep.
You cannot say the devil made me do it. No. That's us. You know, we do it, our bad, not the devil. You can't do that. But in my opinion, as a theologian, that is a major cop-out. That is a major escape to say, devil did it, devil tempted me. No, 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 no. You did this. Now, that doesn't take away the power of it. It actually puts more emphasis on ourselves, where it should be, right? And so when we think about Satan, sometimes Satan gets a lot more credit than Satan should get within the Bible. And so it creates almost this dualism, a good God and a bad God. Or if you don't look at Satan as a God, and yet they give him a lot of power and a lot of...
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
supposedly he's a fallen angel.
Yeah.
right. I mean, I don't know, that is the, so we've ruled out dualism, but then but yet we admit that Satan is referred to in the Bible.
So where does
There-
he fit in?
Yeah, that is
The
kind of the
hierarchy or
question.
whatever.
Yes.
You know, and yeah, I don't know whether it's just, I mean, the angels have free will as well, so he can do his thing within some prescribed
Sure.
area is kind of like the best guess I have.
Sure.
You know, that, yeah, have your fun in your little playground or whatever, but, you know, he's not an equal, but he still
Right.
has power
Yes.
within some kind of prescribed kind of thing or something. I don't know. That's kind
Sure.
of the best I've come up with.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's a more healthy way to look at it, is to understand right off the bat, whether you look at Satan as a fallen angel, Lucifer, or you look at Satan as personified evil, it's to understand the role, and not to understand that,
Just wait a minute.
and not to understand that he is equal in anywhere, right? He is not a god. Here's what Guthrie says, because Andy brings up an excellent point. Okay. We do not have to look forward to a dreary, never-ending battle between a God of light and a God of darkness. Whatever Satan is, he is not really a second God. Notice how the passages in John we have just quoted all speak of the defeat, destruction of this pretender to the throne. Christians do not believe in a powerless or only partially powerful God. We believe in the one true living God, who alone is God and who alone will triumph in the world. So the presence of the devil is in there, right? I mean, there's a U2 song called God Part 2, which I love it, off Rattle and Hum. And he says, I don't believe the devil, I don't believe his book, but the truth is not the same without the lies he made up. So what that means is, it's lies, but yet they're in there, and because of that, it's part of this book. So his influence or his doings, his actions, are in there. And therefore, part of what we read and part of what we study and part of what we dissertain as theologians, right? And we all are theologians at some point, right? We are all armchair theologians, right? Armchair quarterbacks, armchair theologians. And so, yes, but not to give Satan the same level as God, right? And not to be afraid to live your life knowing that God is all-powerful. And if you are God's, then really what do we have to fear? But again, this almost brings up these thoughts of dualism, like Zoroastrianism, or you go further back and say mythology, where you have different gods dueling it out. You know, like whether you're looking at Zeus and Hera, right, or any of the other mythological beings, both male and female, and there were lots of them. And, you know, they don't operate like on the same wavelength as we think that, you know, God would operate. You do something bad, Zeus hurls a lightning bolt at you. Zeus is mad, ticked off, then your crops are all going to die. I mean, yeah, It's just, there is no system of grace, right? So what Guthrie would say, Satan is in there, but Satan is nowhere near equal. And so you're not to be afraid of this. Yeah? All right, so God himself, all right, so when we're talking about evil, is God the source of evil? It's a good question. Is God the source of evil?
I think the common explanation is he allows it. He's not the source of it, but he allows it.
Right, I've heard that.
Hmm? Let's see what Guthrie says. Evil is by definition what God does not will and does not do. There is no secret identity between God and the devil. I thought that was an interesting sentence. Things exist in our world, right? So we have what we would consider a condition, right? That's how Reformed theologians talk about the fall, right? There's a condition that now affects all of creation. Us, trees, plants, animals, everything that lives is affected by this condition, right? So we could logically reason that if God is the creator and ruler of all, that is, then God must be the source of moral evil too. This answer has always been rejected by Christian theology and most vigorously by Calvinistic thinkers who could be most easily tempted by it and who have always been accused of implying it. See, we've been accused of applying this. Those Wesleyans. That's a joke. Because of their insistence on the sovereign will or plan of God that lies behind everything that happens. So, and the argument, what I was joking about, the argument against Calvinism is that, we continue to talk about God's will, God's sovereign will or God's plan. So, well, if you believe that, then this is all part of God's plan, that we get hit by hurricanes and tornadoes and volcanoes, and since the very beginning till now. The Bible teaches uncompromisingly that God is against evil. How could God will or cause resistance and opposition to God when the Creator created human beings precisely for the purpose of having fellowship with us? When Christ, who is God with us, came to overcome human resistance and opposition in order to reconcile us to God. How could God will or cause human indifference, enmity, and injustice in human relationships when God created us to love, help, and do justice in our life together? When Christ came to fulfill God's plan to reconcile us not only to God but to each other. How could God will or cause our self-destroying inhumanity when God created us to be genuinely human as we love God and neighbor? When God sent Christ and gives us the gift of God's Spirit to transform our sinful inhumanity so that we might become again what we were created to be. We will see that God is powerful enough to make good come out of evil. But we cannot say that God is the author of evil. So, yes, evil exists, right? And we can say both natural and moral. It exists, and God is not the author of it. We think about what God has intended for humanity, what we were intended to be, what creation was intended to be. Jesus comes and teaches for 3 years. This is what it was supposed to be like. This is how you were supposed to treat each other. And he had hundreds upon hundreds of followers, but then he also had people say, we don't like what you're saying. So we're going to nail you to a tree. They react to him the same way that you would expect a broken creation to react, right? With violence. We don't like what you're saying. It's not that we don't like what you're saying, so we're going to kick you out of here. We don't like what you're saying, we're going to kill you. We're going to shut you up.
Yeah.
And so,
You're threatening our power, so
it's correct.
We're going to take care of you.
Right, and that's exactly what partially it is a power struggle.
Yep.
It is a power struggle. Jesus is questioning, he is reinterpreting, he is saying that, you have heard it said this for so many years, but I tell you, this is what it means when God said this. And People didn't like that. It's not that, one theologian said, it's not that Jesus scared them because he came at their systems and wanted to change them. He had no use for their systems at all. And I think that's what made people angry. This is useless. Doesn't work. Doesn't work. It's time to scrap this and go back to the drawing board in what God originally intended. And people just didn't like that.
Yeah.
We've always done it this way. God, we don't hear that
Never
in a
heard
church.
that before.
You never hear that in a church, do you? We've always done it this way. And so we're going to continue to do it this way, even though it doesn't work every time we try it. All right. So next week we will continue, and Patty, help me remember this now, because you seem to be the one that remembered. We'll start with C, human bodily existence. All right. Thank you.